when Barack Obama was elected, there was some, not a lot, but some talk on the left that Obama was not an ideologue, that he was not as progressive as he projected. At one point, he had said in an interview that he wanted to be like Ronald Reagan. I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember the exact way that he did it. And many people, and I believe I was one of them, felt like that what he was suggesting there was that aside from whatever the policy was, that he was going to attempt to reorient the country's relationship to government, at least rhetorically, that the era of seeing government as the enemy, which is literally what we lived in through the 80s and frankly through the 90s even. I mean, it was a softer perception of the government as an enemy, but there was still this notion that government is an obstacle to the American public's to, I guess, quality of life. And there was a sense that Obama was going to come in and reorient the country. He did not do that. He did not do that. We heard rhetoric like tighten the belt, and we got austerity quite quickly.
And the stimulus, the T figure was so
the
terrifying
T figure
that
was,
they didn't even touch it.
And much of that stimulus were tax cuts.
Yep.
Which, of course, is to unburden the American public from the clutches of government. Even the Affordable Care Act, the part that was promoted was not the expansion of Medicaid, which was obviously, in many respects, the best part of it. But it was creating a system where government is just steps out of the way and pays the private insurance industry to provide low-cost insurance to a relatively narrow subset of the American public, 10, 12 million people tops. And what we saw last night with Joe Biden, again, this is not put aside what he's actually doing. There is the concept of there's a little tilling of the soil, if you will, with this. Haven't necessarily seen the planting of the seeds or the growing and nurturing of those seedlings, but there was some tilling of the soil last night. And here is Joe Biden talking about trickle-down economics, which, of course, the most prominent example of hearing a criticism of trickle-down economics came almost 30 years ago when George Herbert Walker Bush called it voodoo economics in his primary with, more than 30 years ago with Ronald Reagan.
Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle-down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out.
That, to a certain extent, we also saw Biden talk about praise unions in this speech. And this was, from a rhetorical standpoint, as good as it's gotten in my lifetime in terms of progressiveness. Now, that may be a low bar. It probably is, certainly, particularly considering the era that we're in. But it is what it is.
Well, I mean, just the reaction to, so I just wrote down rhetorical shift here because that's, I think, the number one thing. And another quote from his speech last night was, "The American jobs plan is a blue collar blueprint to build America." So a blue collar blueprint, trickle down economics doesn't work. And the American job, like, this is all an attempt to paint a different picture, right? I mean, Obama had some of that rhetoric in the election leading up to his gaining power, but he largely operated with economic elites, academic elites, like that kind of blue collar perception was something he didn't really try to create, in my view. As soon as he got into power, it was all about the smart professorial perception. And Biden's trying to paint it differently. And I think that is key. Paired with his rhetoric, he did talk about the PRO Act in the speech and said, "Put it on my desk," as if that's possible without getting rid of the filibuster. But he spoke out about the Bessemer Union push. Rhetorical shifts aren't nothing. It's not close to enough, but there is something to be said for it. And I think a lot of it speaks more to the activists and the people on the ground and the grassroots that for the time period in between Obama and Biden have entirely changed the way, and of course the Bernie Sanders campaign, that this stuff is talked about. I mean, and lastly, just the trickle down economics point. Democrats and pundits on the left have been talking about this for many years. The fact that the president is saying trickle down economics doesn't work shouldn't be a big deal, but it is somewhat of a marker.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to David Dayen about the state of play, both what Joe Biden laid out last night in the speech and its chances of ever becoming reality. We'll be right back after this.